Hello and welcome to the second edition of the CCN podcast. I'm your host, Paul Medor. Today is May 18th, 2015. The current bid on Bitcoin is roughly $236, down from a 24-hour high of $237. A couple of interesting stories on CCN today. Spoondely's Tech has received $1.5 million in investment from Bitcoin Shop Incorporated. This is the run-up to a merger of the two companies that is soon to happen. Evander Smart reports that 99% of all Bitcoins are held by 1% of all participants. While there are many potential contributing factors to such a figure, it seems that in this way, Bitcoin is not so very different from traditional monetary vehicles. Read these and other great stories at our website, ccn.la. Now to the core of this episode, an interview I conducted recently with Spendbit.co co-founder Chris Wagner, an American currently living in Canada. Spendbit.co is a great way to find stores that accept Bitcoin, a search engine specifically for that purpose. Please enjoy. So I have Chris Wagner on the line from Spendbit.co, which is a search engine that allows you to search for places that accept Bitcoin, right, Chris?
That's correct.
So tell me about the inspiration and how you started the project.
Well, let's see. I started working on it in early 2014, last year. I guess the idea for it goes back a little further. I'd for a long time noticed that there was kind of a hole in the Bitcoin ecosystem. It was pretty difficult to figure out where to spend your Bitcoins. We had the Bitcoin wiki, which is still in place, but it's become completely unwieldy, and a lot of directories that are either half empty or full of dead links. So that was kind of where the idea came from, I guess.
And so how does it work? Is it's similar to other search engines? It goes out and finds, like, how does it know that a store accepts Bitcoin?
Good question. Right now, that's all pretty much manual, meaning we add each merchant by hand, not literally add the products by hand. That part is technology, web crawling stuff, but the actual merchants, we kind of manage that somewhat manually at this point, although in the future we probably try to find ways to be more automated and even more proactive about it.
So how do we know that the merchants we find through Spendabit are good merchants?
Well, I can't tell you 100%, but we definitely try to shy away from anything that looks particularly sketchy, or we have reason to believe they may not be a legitimate business. And if we do hear any complaints about a particular merchant, we'll certainly remove that merchant if as long as it's there's no reason to think it's a false claim. That said, I think we'll probably formalize that process better in the future so people can help us weed out any, bad actors.
So I know I've asked you this before outside of this recording, but, I guess I got to ask you one more time.
Sure.
What are you going to do if the big players in search come along, like Google? What would you do in the case that they just kind of added their own Bitcoin store search feature?
That's a great question. So I think that first of all, if Google really decided this was the space they wanted to be in and they wanted to tear us apart, they probably could. But barring that, I think that first of all, I think there's room for competition in the general product search market. I mean, there are other players that even compete with Google, like Price Grabber, for example. So I think there's potentially still room for competition in that broader space. But as long as Bitcoin remains relatively niche, it's kind of hard to imagine someone like Google really throwing much at it. But on the other hand, if Bitcoin really does reach its full potential, I think there's a lot of value in that for us alone, just being Bitcoin advocates, so to speak. But we'll certainly do our best to try to compete in any case.
So before I ask you about what your future plans are and what you're excited about with Spendbit, I wanted to ask you, when did you discover Bitcoin? Kind of what are your origins with it, and what does it mean to you now, however long later?
Well, that's always a fun question. So I guess my background before Bitcoin was kind of, I'd become interested in the idea of sound money, kind of the gold standard kind of school, so to speak, which dated back to Ron Paul's campaign in 2008. Kind of got my attention, although at the time I didn't necessarily know what he was talking about. One thing led to the next. I ended up hearing about Bitcoin a couple times through a mailing list I had joined, which was for a thing called Ripple, which is actually a bit different than the current thing called Ripple. That's a whole other story, but yeah. So I had heard about Bitcoin a couple times through that list, and I was pretty skeptical just by the name. I thought, oh, that's a silly idea, a digital currency. But when I finally did get a chance to go and see how it actually works, I was floored, I guess, because it does actually, it creates artificial scarcity, which is a really interesting thing if you think about it, because with most things we want things to not be scarce, but there's one type of thing in the economy that you want to be scarce, and that's money. So anyhow, it was around early 2011, I think, when I kind of came across and actually read up on Bitcoin, and I guess I've been a fan since.
So what do you think of the current Ripple?
I don't know. I haven't thought too much about it. I don't think. Well, it has problems because a dollar in Ripple is not really a dollar because you're still relying on a third party to actually honor that promise that they basically made. So you're basically just trading IOUs on Ripple, whereas with Bitcoin, because it the currency is tied to the network itself, you don't have that problem. But I wouldn't necessarily condemn Ripple. I mean, if it does work as a way to transfer money in practice, then I guess it's a useful, at least a tool to get us, from a system of fiat monies to something more stable.
Yeah, I personally I can see some merit in the technology, but the people who are involved in it have kind of all earned a place on my list, I think. Anyway, so tell us about what's going on with Spendbit. What kind of things you guys have going forward? What are your new developments?
Well, we just launched a thing called Search Partners Program, and the idea there is that other people in the community can kind of hook into our search, either through an API or if they just want something simple like to put onto their blog, they can just copy a little HTML snippet and install a little embedded version of Spendbit search on their site, and can potentially even earn commission from that. If we earn commission, then the search partner will get a portion of that on any sales that occur. So that's one thing. We're also working on something from the other end of the spectrum where we'll give merchants a way to kind of log in rather to our system and make sure their products look good and add tags to them and things like that. So those are more in the near term. Looking further out, we'd like to hopefully make it easier to find places to spend your Bitcoin locally. I know there's a few options in that sphere. I think it still needs a little work though. CoinMap, for example, I've gone to businesses on CoinMap and most of them don't even take Bitcoin, unfortunately. So,
did they even know what it was? Or was it just like somebody listed them for no reason?
Well, in one case, I think I've been to maybe as many as 3 or 4 places that didn't take it, and the two that come to mind, one of them had no idea. The other, they apparently used to sell Bitcoin. It was a coffee shop that used to sell Bitcoin. I guess that's why they were on there, but they were prevented from selling Bitcoin anymore. So, not surprisingly.
Right, you got to be an MSB to do that.
Right.
So, what's the conversion like for merchants that are listed on Spendbit? Like, as far as when someone searches for a product and if they find it through there, and then they click the link, how often do you think that they're actually making the purchase?
It's really hard for us to nail that down right now because we have a very limited number of affiliate relationships set up. We have to do a lot of work on the affiliate side, but also there's a lot of, I'd say the vast majority of merchants don't provide that kind of program. So only the big guys like Overstock and Tiger Direct and so on, tend to have those programs.
And so that's the only time that someone bought something.
Exactly. But the program I mentioned for helping merchants out, which we're calling Merchant Suite, that hopefully will help us get a little more insight into that. But if not, it will at least give us an opportunity to have tighter integration with the merchants and such.
So, is there anything else that our listeners should know about Spendbit?
Nothing comes to mind, but if you're into Bitcoin, and I'm sure at some point you'll want to hopefully spend some. I know a lot of people are kind of holding tight to their coins right now because we've seen such a dramatic decline in the price, but I'd say just give it a try. Spendabit.co, not .com, unfortunately, and just give it a shot and bookmark it.
Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the second edition of the CCN podcast. I'd like to ask our listeners, what is the biggest purchase you've made with Bitcoin recently? Do you struggle to find stores that accept Bitcoin directly? Is spending it all a part of your Bitcoin life? Is it an investment vehicle for you, or is it a currency, or is it something else? Let us know in the comments or via email, paul.mador@cryptocoinsnews.com. This episode was brought to you by coincompetition.com, where you can trade fake Bitcoins in order to win real ones. Signing off for CCN, this is Paul Mador. Visit me at phm.link and check us out at ccn.la.